My house has stood on Maple Street for 130 years. I, Horace Bilby, have lived in it almost 50. Every morning I wake up and look at the cracked ceiling and think that this house will outlive me, just as it has outlived all its owners before me. In my 75 years, I am not what I used to be. My hands shake, my knees ache in the rainy weather that is a frequent visitor to Brockton. But there's still a young Horace in this house. Someone who came here one day, fell in love with these walls and put everything he had into them. When I first saw this Victorian marvel, it was dilapidated. The realtor, a short, fussy man in a gaudy tie, licked his lips nervously as he showed me the rooms. "Mr. Bilby, I understand that the house needs a few cosmetic repairs." He sounded like he was trying to sell me a leaky boat in the middle of the ocean. "Antonia, but with your experience as a civil engineer," I interrupted him then. "I'll take it." The realtor stopped talking and then smiled so wide I was afraid his face would snap in half. My late wife Evelyn thought I was crazy when she saw the purchase. Her thin eyebrows rose high on her forehead. "Horace, honey," she said then, trying to keep her tone calm, "are you sure it's safe to be here?" She was right, but what I saw was not the failing floors and rotten beams, but the high ceilings, the fine molded cornices, and the marble fireplace in the parlor. I saw the house as it could be, and I made it so. For 7 years, every weekend, every vacation, and every free evening, I invested in these walls. Evelyn learned the trowel as well as I did. When she passed away from cancer 12 years ago, I continued the work alone. Now the house is as good as new. 3 stories high, with an attic and a basement. It was a monument to our love. Unlike my son, Perry, he's 46, but he acts like he's still a teenager who thinks the world owes him everything. "Dad, you don't understand," is his typical line that I hear every time he comes to ask for money. "This is a real chance. I'll pay you back double, I promise." I've never seen these returns. Perry always finds a new way to blow his money, betting on the races, dubious investment schemes, poker with the safe guys. In recent years, I stopped giving him cash, which only increased the tension between us. His wife, Darlene, is no better. If Perry is a moth, Darlene is a status hunter. She's the kind of person who's always looking at your watch, appraising your clothes, and mentally calculating how much it all costs. When she and Perry married 15 years ago, I hoped she could talk some sense into my son. Instead, they found in each other the perfect accomplices. "Horace, have you thought about that proposal?" she asked one day, fixing her perfectly styled hair. "Realtors say the houses in this neighborhood are doing very well right now. And you, at your age?" I didn't let her finish. "At my age, I want my house, Darlene, and only mine. I know what they want. Sell the house, take the money, and what? Buy me a room in a nursing home? I'd rather die on this porch than let them take what I built with my own hands. There's only one person I'd change my mind for. My granddaughter, Trixie. She's 11, and she's the only one in this family who inherited not only my stubbornness, but my common sense." "Grandpa," she said to me one day, sitting on the swing I'd hung for her in the backyard, "when I grow up, I want to live in a house just like yours, and I'm going to build it myself." Her eyes sparkled with a determination I recognized. It was the same gleam in Evelyn's eyes when we first saw this house. Trixie is not like her parents. She is practical, inquisitive, and honest to the point of ruthlessness. When she was 7, she told Darlene that her new dress made her look like an inflated balloon. I laughed so hard I almost choked on my tea, and Darlene didn't speak to me for a week, as if I was the one who had taught the child such bluntness. But behind that strong shell was a fragility even her parents couldn't see. Trixie was born with a rare genetic condition. Doctors call it Hutchinson-Gilford syndrome, or progeria. Her body ages 8 times faster than normal. In her 11 years, she looked like a little old lady, thin skin, visible veins, sparse hair. But her eyes remained young, bright, full of life that slipped away from her with each passing day. Perry and Darlene didn't know how to deal with her condition. They were ashamed of her appearance, trying to appear in public with her less often. Darlene once confessed after her 3rd glass of wine that she can't stand those looks, this pity in people's eyes. To her, her daughter had become a source of social discomfort, not a child in need of unconditional love. I was different. To me, Trixie was a miracle, a smart, brave miracle who somehow grew up in a family where she was misunderstood. We spent every weekend together. I taught her carpentry, showed her how to read blueprints, told her stories about the buildings I helped build. She soaked up the knowledge like a sponge and asked questions that made me dizzy. Grandpa, why don't skyscrapers fall in earthquakes? How do they make glass unbreakable? Is it true that the Egyptian pyramids were built by aliens? To the last question, I replied that it would have been easier for aliens to build something more practical than giant triangles in the desert. She laughed until she was in tears. Trixie had been sick a lot the last few months. Colds that didn't go away for weeks. Joint pains that kept her up at night. I watched her slowly fade away and it tore at my heart. Perry and Darlene, busy with their own affairs, preferred to overlook the obvious. I insisted on consultations with specialists, paid doctor bills, drove her to procedures. Darlene once accused me of dramatizing the situation and making Trixie feel sicker than she really is. This was a week before Trixie passed out at breakfast. I arrived that day to pick her up for our usual Saturday walk. We were going to the Brockton Museum of Natural History. There was an exhibit opening about ancient builders, and Trixie couldn't wait to see the models of the world's first cities. As I walked into the house, I heard Darlene screaming from the kitchen. I rushed in there and saw Trixie lying on the floor. Her little body seemed like a rag doll, discarded without care. Milk from an overturned bowl of cereal was spilling out onto the tile. What happened? I knelt beside her, checking her pulse. It was weak but steady. She just, fell. Darlene looked confused, holding the phone in her hand. I was going to call an ambulance. Then call it, I shouted, and she flinched as if I'd hit her. The ambulance came 12 minutes later, the longest 12 minutes of my life. Trixie didn't regain consciousness. I held her hand and talked about how we'd go to the exhibit, how I'd show her how the first aqueducts were built, how we'd go to her favorite cafe afterward for hot chocolate. The medics were quick and precise. Oxygen mask, IV, stretcher. One of them, a young guy with kind eyes, put his hand on my shoulder. Are you her grandfather? You can come with us. I didn't even look at Darlene, just stood up and followed them. In the ambulance, Trixie briefly regained consciousness. Her eyes, those bright, vibrant eyes in her haggard face, found mine. I'm sorry, Grandpa, she whispered. It seems we won't be going to the exhibition today. We'll go some other time, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. When you're better. She smiled weakly and closed her eyes again. A team of doctors met us at the hospital. Their faces were serious, their movements polished. I filled out some forms, answered dozens of questions about her condition, medications, previous hospitalizations. Perry and Darlene arrived an hour later. He in a crumpled shirt, she with smeared mascara. What are they saying? Perry asked, avoiding my eyes. Nothing yet, I answered. They're running tests. We sat in the waiting area, not speaking. 3 people bound by blood and almost nothing else. After 2 hours, a doctor came out to us, a tall woman with short gray hair and tired eyes. Trixie Bilby's family? She looked at us over her glasses. I'm Dr. Page. Can we talk in my office? We followed her down a hallway with brightly colored walls decorated with children's drawings. Her office smelled of coffee and antiseptic. Trixie's condition is critical, Dr. Page said without preamble. She's in heart failure due to the progression of her underlying condition. We've stabilized her, but, she paused, searching for words. The prognosis is not favorable. What does that mean? Perry asked. His voice sounded strange, like he was speaking through thick glass. It means Trixie's heart is worn out, the doctor replied. Onaiko, it was working 8 times harder than it should. We can keep her alive for a while, but how long? I interrupted. How much time does she have? Dr. Page looked me straight in the eye. Days, maybe weeks if we're lucky. Darlene burst into tears. Perry froze, staring at a single point on the wall. And I felt something inside me break, quietly without a sound, like ice on a river in spring. Can I see her? I asked. Yes, but she's under sedation. The doctor nodded. You can't expect her to be responsive. Trixie lay in the ICU, surrounded by monitors and tubes. Her small body was lost among the hospital sheets. I sat down next to her and took her hand, so cold, so fragile. "I'm here, Trixie," I whispered. "Grandpa's here and he's not going anywhere." And I kept my word. I didn't leave the hospital for the next 2 weeks. I slept in the chair by her bed, ate hospital food, washed in the tiny sink in the bathroom. Perry and Darlene came every day, but they never stayed long. They always had reasons to leave: work, meetings, errands. I didn't judge them. Not everyone can look a dying child in the face and not look away. Every time I left, Darlene asked me the same thing. "Are you sure you're up to it, Horace? Maybe you should rest at home. We could take turns." And every time I'd say, "I'll be fine, Darlene. Go on." In the rare moments when Trixie regained consciousness, I told her stories about me and Evelyn rebuilding the house, about strange finds in the old walls, letters, coins, children's toys, about how I'd once nearly fallen through the basement floor and how Evelyn had laughed as she'd pulled me out of there. Trixie smiled as she listened to me and sometimes fell asleep to my voice. It was times like these that I believed she could pull through, that a miracle would happen, that she was stronger than her illness. But I was wrong. Hospital days become one endless nightmare. Time here isn't measured in hours. It's measured in procedures. Morning rounds with the doctors, changing IVs, temperature measurements, new medications, reading the monitors, and waiting. Endless, waiting for the miracle that never comes. Trixie sleeps most of the time. Dr. Page says it's a good thing. She feels no pain when she sleeps. But in those rare moments when she opens her eyes, I see in them a question I can't answer. "Why me, Grandpa?" I hold her slender fingers in my wrinkled palms and find no words. The doctors talk about her condition, using terms meant to sound scientific and detached. Myocardial failure, renal dysfunction, polyorganic exhaustion. But behind those words, I hear a simple and terrible truth. My granddaughter is dying, and no one can stop it. On the 5th day, Trixie wakes up more conscious than usual. Her eyes are clear, her gaze focused. She looks up at me and smiles weakly. "Grandpa," her voice is barely audible over the noise of the machines. "Tell me about Daddy when he was little." I didn't expect such a request. My relationship with Perry has always been complicated, and I've tried not to discuss it with Trixie. But now, looking into her eyes, I can't say no. "Your daddy was born in the year 1979, I begin, replaying images of the past in my mind. "It was raining hard that day. Your grandmother Evelyn said the sky cried tears of happiness. Perry was a remarkably calm baby. He hardly ever cried, could lie in his crib for hours looking at the toys above his head. Evelyn was afraid there was something wrong with him, but the pediatrician assured us that some babies are just born contemplative. In kindergarten, the teachers praised him for his imagination. He could play alone for hours, creating complex worlds out of constructors and figurines. But even then, his peculiarity, the inability to accept defeat, became apparent. If things didn't go according to his plan, he'd fly into a rage. He overturned games, tore up drawings, once even bit a boy who destroyed his tower of cubes. He should have been an architect like me, I say to Trixie, then correct myself, a civil engineer. He had a talent for spatial reasoning, but he lacked patience. I remember how in school, Perry got perfect grades in the subjects that interested him and completely ignored the rest. His teachers kept saying the same thing at every meeting: "Your son has great potential, but he's not putting in the effort." I tell Trixie that her father was a brilliant mathematician, could solve the hardest problems in his mind while the other kids were puffing away on calculators. When he was 12, he won the City Math Olympiad. I was so proud that I bought him a real engineering calculator, just like the one I used myself. "And then?" Trixie asks. Her voice is weaker, but her eyes still burn with curiosity. "And then there was adolescence, the time when Perry and I finally lost touch. Your dad met some new friends in high school," I say, leaving out the details about the bunch of truants and bullies he got involved with. "They distracted him from his studies. Actually, they did more than that. They introduced him to gambling. First, it was innocent games of cards for change in the school bathroom, then betting on sports matches. By the time he was 16, Perry was losing his pocket money regularly and asking Evelyn and me for more and more. When I found a $300 promissory note in his room, written in crooked teenage handwriting, it was the first time we had a real fight. "Do you realize what you're doing?" I held the paper in front of his face. "Do you realize what debt is?" It's temporary, Dad. He looked somewhere past me, avoiding meeting my gaze. I have a system. Next time I'll get it right. A system? I couldn't believe my ears. Perry, the only system in gambling is designed to make you lose. We paid off his debt, but I made a condition that he had to get a part-time job and pay us back. He agreed, but he worked at the local supermarket for exactly 2 weeks. Then he quit, saying it was humiliating and a waste of his talents. That's when I first thought that Evelyn and I had done something wrong in his upbringing. Maybe we gave him too much freedom, or on the contrary, too controlling. I never found the answer, but I don't tell Trixie about it. Instead, I tell her how her father once built a birdhouse for a school project, about how he read all the Harry Potter books in 1 week, about how he cried when our old dog Buster died. Trixie listens, occasionally asking questions, but I can see the fatigue overpowering her again. Gradually, her eyelids get heavy and she falls asleep. I continue talking for a while longer, more to myself than to her. The night in the hospital is a special experience. The corridors are hushed, the dimmed lights creating a ghostly atmosphere. The nurses move silently like shadows. The sounds of the machines grow louder in the silence of the night. I doze in the uncomfortable chair, awakening at the slightest change in Trixie's breathing. It's times like these that I'm particularly haunted by memories. I think back to the day Perry announced he was dropping out of college after his first semester. Evelyn and I were stunned. He had enrolled in engineering with a full scholarship. His math ability was still exceptional, despite the sloppiness in school. "It's not for me," he said when we asked him why. "I want to go into business." Business turned out to be another get-rich-quick scheme, which of course failed. Others followed, selling used cars, internet marketing, even an attempt to open his own bar. None of the endeavors lasted more than a few months. Each time Perry came back to us for money, and each time I got tougher in my answers. Evelyn was softer. She always made excuses for his failures, always believed that this time it'll work out. "He's just looking for himself, Horace," she said. "Not everybody finds their calling at once." But as the years passed, Perry was still looking for himself, losing money and destroying relationships with anyone who tried to help him. When he turned 30, Evelyn became ill. The cancer was aggressive, and we both knew time was short. In the last months of her life, she spoke of Perry often. "Promise me you won't leave him," she pleaded, squeezing my hand with her gaunt fingers. "He's weak, Horace. He needs you, even if he doesn't realize it." I promised. And after she died, I tried to keep it. I tried to build a bridge across the divide between us. I'd invited Perry to dinners, offered to help him find a steady job, even tried to interest him in rebuilding the house, an endeavor that had always brought me comfort. But the more I tried, the more he drifted away. And then he met Darlene, and the distance between us grew even further. She was a beautiful and ambitious woman with a keen sense of social status. She saw Perry not as a loser with a history of failure, but as someone with potential and connections. By connections, she meant me and my house, which by then had grown significantly in value due to my efforts in neighborhood development. Their wedding was lavish beyond their means. I paid for most of it, silently swallowing my indignation at the extravagance of the celebration. Darlene wanted to impress her friends and family, and Perry, as usual, couldn't say no to her. After the wedding, their visits had become infrequent and always ended with talk of money. They were living beyond their means, constantly strapped for credit. Perry changed jobs more often than he changed shirts. Darlene insisted on expensive vacations and brand-name clothes. And then Trixie was born, and everything changed. The first time I held her in my arms, a tiny bundle with serious eyes, something inside me melted. I realized I'd been given a second chance, a chance to love and be loved without the bitterness of past disappointments. The first years of her life were relatively peaceful. Signs of progeria showed up around age 3. Unusual body proportions, hair loss, thinning skin. The diagnosis was a shock to everyone, but especially to Darlene. She had always envisioned her daughter as an extension of herself. Beautiful, successful, desirable. Instead, she was to raise a child who would never fit into her ideas of normalcy. Perry was doing a little better. He could play with Trixie without noticing her differences from the other kids. But deep down, I think he saw her illness as further proof of his bad luck, Another failure on a long list. I was the only one who saw Trixie not as a tragedy, but as a person. Bright, intelligent, curious. We hit it off almost immediately. She loved my stories about construction, and I loved her questions that made me think about things I took for granted. Now sitting next to her hospital bed, I think about how little time we had, how much I wanted to show her, tell her, explain to her, how much we missed. On the eighth day, her condition deteriorates dramatically. The monitors start beeping in the middle of the night. Nurses and doctors rush into the room. They ask me to leave, but I refuse. I stand against the wall, watching them fight for her life. Dr. Page approaches me after the crisis has passed. "Mr. Bilby," her voice is quiet but firm, "we need to talk about palliative care. I know what that means. They're not trying to save Trixie anymore. They're trying to make her care as comfortable as possible." "How much?" That question becomes my mantra. "A day or two," she answers, looking me straight in the eye. Her heart is too weak. I call Perry and Darlene. They arrive an hour later, unusually sober, subdued. Even Darlene, usually so flawless, looks disheveled, no makeup. The three of us sit at Trixie's bedside. She's awake, and then she goes back to sleep. When she's awake, we take turns talking to her. Perry tells the anecdotes she's always loved. Darlene shows pictures from family albums. I hold her hand and talk about home, our sanctuary, our heritage. On the ninth day, Trixie asks us something. Her voice is barely audible, but the words are clear. "I want you to stop fighting. All of you. Please, we promise." In that moment, we probably even believe our promises. On the 10th day, Perry and Darlene don't show up until the evening. When they finally show up, they smell like alcohol, and Perry's eyes are red, either from crying or something else. They apologize, saying something about stress and needing a distraction. I'm not arguing. Everyone has their own form of grief. On the 11th day, Trixie barely wakes up. Her breathing is shallow, her pulse is weak. I don't leave her side for a minute, not even to eat. The nurses bring me sandwiches and coffee, but I barely notice the taste. Perry and Darlene are late again. When they finally arrive, I see something new on Darlene's face. Not just sorrow, but impatience. Like she needs to be somewhere else. Perry avoids looking me in the eye. "Can we talk in the hallway?" He asks after a few moments of awkward silence. I walk out with him, leaving Darlene with Trixie. She sits staring at her phone, occasionally glancing at my granddaughter's still face. "Daddy," Perry shifts from foot to foot. "We've been thinking, when this is all over." He pauses, searching for words. "You might want to take a vacation. Maybe go somewhere." "What are you talking about?" I don't know what he's getting at. "You know, a change of scenery. Take my mind off things." I look at my son, and I realize I don't know him at all. This man with my features and Evelyn's eyes is a total stranger to me. "My granddaughter is dying, Perry." My voice sounds unexpectedly calm. "And you're offering me a vacation?" He mumbles something back, but I'm not listening. I go back to the room where Darlene is still sitting there, staring at her phone. On the 12th day, around 3 in the morning, Trixie opens her eyes. I'm dozing in the chair next to her and wake up to her calling my name. "Grandpa," her voice is barely audible. "I'm cold." I cover her with another blanket, but she continues to shiver. I press the nurse call button. No one comes. I carefully sit down on the edge of the bed and take Trixie in my arms, careful not to hit the numerous tubes. She's so light, like a bird. I hold her, cradling her as I did Perry long ago. Gradually the trembling subsides. She looks at me with her huge eyes, which seem even bigger in her gaunt face. "Grandpa, I'm scared," she whispers. "I know, baby," I answer, feeling a lump in my throat. "But I'm here. I'm with you. Will you tell me a story about the house?" And I do. About how I found a stash in the wall filled with old newspapers from the turn of the century. How Evelyn and I discovered a colony of bats in the attic and had to carefully relocate them. About how lightning once struck an oak tree in the backyard during a thunderstorm, and we sat up all night without electricity, by candlelight, telling each other scary stories. I talk, and Trixie listens. Sometimes she smiles, sometimes her eyes close, but she always opens them again, as if afraid of missing something. Gradually, her breathing becomes shallower and shallower. The intervals between breaths are getting longer. The monitors start beeping, but I ignore them. I continue to narrate, holding her in my arms. And then there is silence. Trixie takes one last, barely perceptible breath, and her body goes limp. Her eyes remain open, but her gaze is no longer focused. Nurses rush into the room. Someone tries to take Trixie from me, but I don't let them. I sit cradling her body as the doctors pronounce her dead. Time stands still. Then Perry and Darlene come in. They're crying, hugging each other. Darlene sobs hysterically, repeating, "My girl, my girl." Perry stands next to me, his face contorted with pain that, for perhaps the first time in his life, he can't ignore. I hand them Trixie and walk out of the room. I walk down the hallway, unable to see anything in front of me. I take the elevator down, walk out of the hospital. It's raining outside, a fine, cold October rain. It mixes with the tears on my face. I don't remember how I got home. I probably called a cab, but those details have been erased from my memory. I only remember standing in front of my house, the Victorian mansion that Evelyn and I love so much, that I promised to show Trixie when she grew up. The house greets me with silence and the smell of dust. I haven't been here in 2 weeks, and it can be felt. Mail envelopes clutter the floor under the front door. On the kitchen table is a cup of dried coffee that I didn't have time to wash the morning Trixie passed out. I walk through the rooms without turning on the lights. In the living room, on the mantelpiece are pictures. Evelyn on our wedding day, Perry in his graduation gown, one of the few accomplishments of his that I could be proud of, and Trixie on the backyard swing, smiling, with her sparse hair waving. I take her picture and sit down in my old chair. I stare at her face, memorizing every feature, every freckle, every curve of her smile. Only then, in the silence of the house Evelyn and I were building for future generations, do I allow myself to feel the loss fully. The grief comes in a wave so strong it takes my breath away. I cry without holding back, as I didn't cry even when Evelyn died. Because with Trixie, my last hope died, the last person who cared. I don't know how much time I spent like that, sitting in the dark with a picture of my granddaughter in my hands. I could have sworn I heard her laughter echoing through the empty rooms. He could have sworn he felt the touch of her small hand on his shoulder. But those were only ghosts of memory. The reality remained the same. I was alone again in this huge house full of memories. How would I survive the next days, months, years? The thought seems unbearable, but I know I must. For Evelyn, for Trixie, for the promises I made to them. I fall asleep in the chair, still clutching the photograph in my hands, and I dream about Trixie running around the house, opening every door, peeking into every room, exploring every corner like she always dreamed she would. In my dream, her skin is healthy, her hair thick and shiny, her movements quick and confident. "Look, Grandpa," she shouts, pointing to something in the far corner of the attic. I try to discern what's there, but am awakened by the sound of the doorbell. The doorbell rang again, insistent and harsh. I peeled my eyes open, fighting a headache after a night spent in the chair. Trixie's picture was still clutched in my fingers. I carefully placed it on the coffee table and stood up, feeling my joints crunch. The bell rang a third time, accompanied now by a loud bang. I staggered to the door, not thinking about my appearance. What did it matter what I looked like? My granddaughter was gone. When I opened the door, I saw Perry and Darlene. They stood on the threshold, dressed far too well for people who had just lost a daughter. Perry was in an iron shirt and slouchy pants. Darlene was in a navy blue suit I'd never seen before. Her hair was impeccably styled, her makeup hiding any trace of recent tears. "Dad," Perry stepped from foot to foot. "We called, but you didn't answer." "My phone was dead," I answered, though I didn't really remember where it was. "What are you guys doing here?" They looked at each other, and there was something in that look that made me tense. In 46 years, I'd studied all of my son's facial expressions. This particular one, a mixture of nervousness and ill-concealed excitement, usually appeared when he was about to tell me about his next get-rich-quick scheme. "May I come in?" Darlene asked. "We need to talk." I stepped aside, letting them into the house. They walked into the living room and sat on the couch side by side like partners in a presentation. I sank back into my chair, suddenly feeling like a visitor in my own home. "Horace," Darlene began. We realize this isn't a good time, but there are matters that can't be put off. I remained silent, looking at her perfect manicure, her pearl earrings, her new suit. It's not like they've been saving money lately. It's about the house, she continued when she realized I wasn't going to make it easy for her. You see, the situation has changed. What do you mean? My voice sounded hoarse after the long silence. Darlene looked at Perry, clearly expecting him to take over the conversation. My son cleared his throat, his fingers nervously rubbing the edge of the pillow. Dad, remember 3 years ago when you gave me power of attorney? When you went in for heart surgery? I remembered. There was a little problem with a heart valve, nothing serious, but the doctors insisted on surgery. I signed a power of attorney for Perry so he could handle the finances if anything went wrong. The surgery was a success and I forgot about that document. Apparently Perry didn't. What about her? I asked, even though I was beginning to see where this was going. It's still valid. Perry wasn't looking at me, but somewhere over my shoulder. And I've been using it to, restructure some assets. What assets? Tinum. The house, Darlene interjected, obviously losing patience with Perry's roundabout explanations. We mortgaged the house. I stared at them, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. My house, the house I'd rebuilt with my own hands, the house where I'd spent my best years with Evelyn, the house I promised to show Trixie when she grew up. You did what? It was the only way out, Perry spoke quickly, as if afraid I wouldn't let him finish. One. We were in debt, serious debt. The debt collectors called every day. They threatened to repossess the car, seize the property. Your casino debts? I looked him straight in the eye, making him look away. Not only that, Darlene interjected. There were medical bills for Trixie's treatment. Insurance didn't cover everything. And then there were the loans. We tried to start our own business, but the terms weren't as favorable as we'd been promised. I shook my head, trying to digest the information. Sure, they were using Trixie's illness as an excuse, but I personally paid most of her medical bills. The money went to something else. How much, I asked. How much did you borrow against the house? They looked at each other again. $450,000, Perry finally said. I almost choked. The amount was huge. The house was worth about $600,000 at the last appraisal, but I would never have taken out a loan like that. Where's that money now? We paid off our debts, Darlene said quickly, and invested the rest in a promising startup. A tech company. Perry met the founder last year. They have a revolutionary idea. I raised my hand, stopping the flow of her words. When did you do this? 2 weeks ago, Perry answered, and I felt a cold rage rise up inside me. 2 weeks ago. As I sat in the hospital next to a dying Trixie, they were putting a loan on my house. You used a fake power of attorney. It wasn't a question. That power of attorney expired a year after the surgery. No, Darlene shook her head with an unpleasant smile. We consulted a lawyer. The document was drafted without an expiration date. I really didn't remember the details. Perhaps she was right, but it didn't matter. Using a power of attorney in this way was unethical, to say the least. And you decided to inform me about it today? I asked. When my granddaughter, your daughter, isn't even buried yet? We wanted to wait for a better time. Darlene at least had the conscience to look embarrassed. But the bank started calling. They want to make sure you're aware of the situation. The first payment on the loan is in 2 weeks. And who's going to make it? There's that look between them again. You see, Dad, Perry began, but Darlene interrupted him. Horace, let's be honest. The house is too big for one person your age. It's expensive to maintain. The heating, the roof repairs you keep putting off. She put her hand on the ceiling, where there was indeed a small leak. We thought this might be, a way out for all of us. A way out? I questioned. We could sell the house, Darlene explained in the tone one uses with a child who doesn't understand. Pay off the loan and use the rest of the money to buy something smaller. Maybe an apartment in a senior complex. There's an on-site doctor, social activities. I was staring at her, not believing my ears. They weren't just mortgaging my house. They were planning to completely change my life without asking my opinion. And where will you live? I asked. We have a house in Broken Hills, Darlene said, her eyes lighting up. It's a new neighborhood, very up and coming. There's a golf club, a swimming pool. How much is it worth? About 350,000, Perry replied. But it's a great investment. Prices are going up fast there. I closed my eyes, trying to keep my anger in check. They'd mortgaged my house and were planning to use the money to buy their own place in an upscale neighborhood and put me in a nursing home. You don't own the house anymore, Horace, Darlene said, obviously deciding there was no point in beating around the bush. Sherman Arinperm. At least not completely. The bank owns most of it now, and they won't be happy if payments start getting late. I rose slowly from the chair. My legs were barely holding me up, but I didn't want to sit there looking down at them. You two, my voice was quiet, but I could see them both tense up. Come into my house one day after your daughter's death and tell me you stole it from me? We didn't steal anything, Perry objected. The power of attorney was legitimate. You used a document issued for an emergency to mortgage the house while I sat by the bedside of a dying child. I could feel my hands shaking. If it wasn't theft, what was it? It was the only way out, Perry repeated. We had no choice. You always have a choice. I shook my head. And you always make the wrong one. I headed for the stairs leading to the second floor. They looked at me in bewilderment. Where are you going? Perry asked. To get my bag, I answered. Since I don't own the house anymore, I assume you want me to leave. I went upstairs, leaving them looking at each other in confusion. In the bedroom, I opened the closet and pulled out an old travel bag, the same one that Evelyn and I had once taken on our only real vacation to Vermont the year before her diagnosis. I put a few shirts, pants, underwear in the bag, a toothbrush from the bathroom, a picture of Evelyn from the bedside table, Trixie's photo album from the dresser drawer, a few books, a wallet with cash and cards, a phone which was really dead, and a charger. And then he opened the secret safe behind the painting, one that even Perry didn't know about. Inside were my most prized possessions, my marriage certificate, Evelyn's will, her wedding ring, the one she'd taken off before she died and asked me to keep for Trixie. Now it would never grace my granddaughter's finger. I put it all in the bag. And one more thing. A small digital recorder. An old model, but reliable. I used it to record ideas for projects when I was still working. For the last few years, it served a different purpose. I walked downstairs holding the bag in one hand. Perry and Darlene were still sitting on the couch, now with obvious relief on their faces. They had obviously expected a much more violent reaction. Dad, you don't have to leave right now, Perry said with fake concern in his voice. We can discuss temporary arrangements. Don't bother, I set the bag on the floor. I know what you're up to. I've known for a long time. They looked at each other in bewilderment. What are you talking about? Darlene asked, but I saw the corner of her mouth quiver, the first sign of concern. Do you think I'm blind? Or out of my mind? I chuckled. I've seen you looking around the house, appraising it every time you come in. I've heard you whisper about how things could be different if the house was yours. Dad, don't you understand? Perry started, but I interrupted him. No, you don't understand. Did you think you'd caught me off guard? That I'd cry and beg? Or resign myself to letting you send me to live out my days in some doghouse while you enjoy the house I built with my own hands? I picked up my bag and set it on the coffee table. Slowly, I unzipped it and pulled out the recorder. Fools, you have just made a fatal mistake, for this recorder has been recording your every conversation in my house for the past 3 years. I pressed the play button. Darlene's voice came out of the small speaker. When he finally goes into the hospital, we'll use power of attorney. He won't even remember signing it. The old man is barely thinking straight. Then Perry's voice. What if he finds out before we can get it finalized? Darlene again. He won't. He'll be too busy with that precious granddaughter of his. God, I'm so sick of him coddling her. I turned off the tape. Perry and Darlene's faces froze in shock. She had gone so pale that the freckles on her nose seemed painted on. He opened his mouth but couldn't utter a word. This is just one of dozens of entries, I said calmly. There's one about how you planned to forge my signature if you needed to, and how you discussed what kind of real estate you'd buy with the money from the sale of the house. And even, I paused, looking directly at Darlene, how you complained to your friend on the phone that you were tired of dealing with a mutant child. Yeah, I heard that too. You can't, Darlene started to say, but her voice broke. It's illegal to record people without their consent. Maybe, I shrugged. But you know what else is illegal? Fraud, forgery, abuse of power of attorney. I think the police and the bank would be very interested in those records. You're bluffing, Perry said, but I could see fear in his eyes. You would never go to the police against your own son. Test me, I replied, looking him straight in the eye. I just buried the only person in this family that I truly cared about. I have nothing to lose. I slipped the recorder back into my bag and zipped it up. Swear to it, and that's not all, I added. Remember that safe in my office that you spent all your childhood searching for the key to? The one you finally cracked 3 weeks ago, thinking I wouldn't notice? Perry shuddered. I hit the mark. Those documents you found in there? Fake. The real will, insurance policies, and stock certificates are elsewhere. As is a real power of attorney with a clear expiration date of 1 year after the surgery. No more. Darlene made a strange sound, something between a sob and a chuckle. You're lying, she said, but without conviction. Why don't you check it out? I suggested. Call the bank right now. Ask them if they've verified the authenticity of the power of attorney. Not the one you showed them, but the one registered with a notary. They didn't say a word. I could see their brains working, trying to figure out if I was bluffing or not. And I just stood there looking at them and felt strangely calm. For the first time in years, I saw right through Perry, the scared, insecure kid who was always looking for the easy way out. What do you want? He finally asked. For you to get out of my house, I answered simply, and out of my life. And the credit? Darlene was still trying to maintain control of the situation. The bank will get its money. I picked up the bag from the table. But not from me. You took out the loan, you pay it back. I headed for the door, but stopped, looking back at them one last time. One more thing. Trixie's funeral will be my own. And you won't be there. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me. The sun was blinding my eyes after the twilight of the living room. The old maple tree in the backyard was dropping yellow leaves on the path. I took a deep breath and walked away from the house I'd built with my own hands without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Darlene yelling something in a broken voice and Perry trying to calm her down. Their voices grew quieter and quieter as I moved farther away. But the expressions on their faces, shock, disbelief, fear, I will always remember. I walked the streets of Brockton with no definite destination. My body moved on autopilot as my mind tried to cope with the cascade of events of the past 2 weeks. Trixie's death, the betrayal of my son, the loss of the house. Too much for one old man. The fall wind was chilling me to the bone. I gripped the handle of my bag tighter, remembering the look on Perry and Darlene's faces when I turned on the tape. It gave me a fleeting satisfaction, but it quickly faded away, leaving only bitterness behind. I hadn't planned in advance where I would go, but my feet led me to a small motel on the outskirts of town. Pine Haven, the shabby sign over the entrance said. It had once been a decent place for tourists who came to admire the fall foliage of New England. Now it was mostly truckers, and those with nowhere else to go. The woman at the front desk, a full, tired-faced woman with dyed red hair, didn't even look up when I walked in. $65 a night, she said, flipping through a magazine, plus a deposit of 10. I need a room for a few days, I said, pulling out my wallet. She finally looked at me, and something like sympathy flashed in her gaze. Trouble at home, huh? She asked, handing me a registration card. You could say that. She nodded, not asking for details. Number 7, down the hall. It's quieter there. The room was exactly as I'd expected. Shabby carpeting, a squashed bed, a TV that remembered the kinetoscope days. But it was clean, and that was enough. I sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. Finally turned it on and saw several missed calls from Perry. Ignoring them, I dialed another number. Greenberg and Associates, how can I help you? I heard a pleasant female voice. Hello, this is Horace Bilby. I need to speak to Mr. Greenberg. Tell him it's urgent. As I waited for the connection, I thought about my plan. It had begun to take shape 3 years ago, when I'd first noticed signs that Perry and Darlene were more interested in my house than they should be. Little details, the way they evaluated rooms, the way they struck up conversations about the real estate market. The way Darlene once accidentally looked at my bank statements. Horace, Greenberg's voice brought me back to reality. What's wrong? Arthur Greenberg had been my friend and attorney for over 30 years. He helped with the paperwork on the house, with Evelyn's will, with setting up the trust for Trixie. He was one of the few people I trusted completely. They did it, Art, I said without preamble. Perry and Darlene used the power of attorney to foreclose on the house. There was silence. Then Greenberg sighed. Shit, you were right. How much did they take? 450,000. That sucks, he rarely swore, and it showed how serious the situation was. But we were prepared, remember? Where are you now? Pine Haven Motel. Left home. Good, you stay there. I'll be there in an hour and we'll talk it over. I passed out and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The plan Greenberg and I had devised was more of an insurance policy. I'd never really believed I'd have to use it. Part of me still hoped that Perry would come to her senses, that Darlene's motherly love for Trixie would outweigh her greed. I was wrong. The phone rang again. Perry, I dismissed the call. A second later, a message came through. Dad, we need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. Call me. I grinned. A misunderstanding. Like they'd accidentally taken out a loan for almost $500,000 against someone else's house. Exactly 1 hour later, there was a knock on the door. Greenberg stood on the doorstep with a leather briefcase in his hand and a concerned expression on his wrinkled face. You look lousy, he said in lieu of greeting. My granddaughter died yesterday, I replied, stepping aside to let him pass. Greenberg froze. God, Horace. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. He put his briefcase down on the small table by the window and hugged me tightly. I let myself lean on my friend's shoulder for a moment, feeling genuine sympathy for the first time in days. What happened? He asked when we finally pulled away from each other. I told him about the last 2 weeks, about the hospital, about Trixie's last hours, about coming home and talking to Perry and Darlene, about their plans for the house and for me. Sons of bitches, Greenberg muttered, shaking his head. I'm sorry, Horace, but there's no other way to put it. I'm not arguing. I sat on the edge of the bed. What now? Greenberg opened his briefcase and pulled out several folders. Now we put our plan into action. The power of attorney you signed 3 years ago was limited to 1 year, as you requested. Here's a copy. He held out the document to me. I looked at the paper. Yes, the term was clearly stated, valid for 1 year from the date of signing. But Darlene said she'd consulted a lawyer. He said the power of attorney was still valid. Either she's lying or they found a lawyer who doesn't read documents particularly carefully, Greenberg shrugged. Either way, we have a copy of the original with a clear expiration date. Also, Nasr Return. He pulled out another document. We have a notarized statement you made 2 years ago that you did not authorize Perry to do anything with the house. I remembered that document. We'd drawn it up right after I'd noticed that Perry had become overly interested in my finances. But the main trump card, Greenberg continued, is the notes you mentioned. Did you bring a tape recorder? I nodded and pulled the device out of my bag. There are dozens of hours in here. They didn't know I recorded them every time they came to the house. Greenberg took the recorder and plugged it into his laptop. Great. I'll send the files to my assistant to analyze. We need the most compromising parts. And Horace, he looked at me seriously, tapes made without the consent of the participants are not always admissible as evidence in court, but they can be very useful for extrajudicial pressure. I understood that. The wiretap law in our state was complicated, but I wasn't going to go to trial. I wanted something else. What about tampering with documents? I asked. The ones that were in the safe? Greenberg smiled, a rare sight for a normally serious lawyer. It was a brilliant move, Horace. When you told me that Perry spent his entire childhood trying to get to the contents of the safe, I knew that sooner or later he would try to break into it. We replaced all the important documents in the safe with skillfully crafted copies with minor alterations. A will in which I supposedly left the house to Perry, but with one small legal error that invalidated it. An insurance policy with the wrong beneficiary listed. And most importantly, a copy of an unlimited power of attorney. Are you sure they used a forgery? Greenberg asked, looking through the files on his laptop. Almost certainly. I kept the real documents with Edith. Edith Morrison was an old friend of mine and Evelyn's, a retired nurse. She lived in a small cottage on the other side of town and kept my envelope of documents in her home safe. Okay, Greenberg leaned back in his chair. Here's what we've got. A forged power of attorney used to get a large loan, tapes of conversations proving malice, switched documents they probably think are real, plus the real originals in a safe place. He looked at me with a slight smile. You know, Horace, for a civil engineer, you're a pretty good thinking lawyer. I had a good teacher, I replied, feeling something like hope for the first time in days. At that moment, my phone rang again. Perry, I showed the screen to Greenberg. Could I answer it on speakerphone? I asked. I want you to hear. He nodded, pulling a small recording recorder out of his briefcase. It was a professional habit to always record important conversations. I pressed the receive button and put it on speakerphone. Hun, hello. Dad, finally! Perry's voice sounded tense. Where are you? Darlene and I are worried. Really? I made eye contact with Greenberg, who gave me a thumbs up in approval of my low-key tone. Of course. You left in such a state. After everything that happened to Trixie, we don't think you quite understand the situation. Explain it to me. Look, with this loan, we really meant well. For all of us. That money, some of it was for your well-being. We were planning to buy you an apartment, hire a nurse. How generous of you. I couldn't help but be sarcastic. Spending some of the money from my own house on me. Dad, please, he said with a pleading tone in his voice. Let's meet and talk calmly. I'm sure we'll find a solution that will satisfy everyone. I've already found a solution, I said. I talked to the bank. There was a pause, then, what did you tell them? The truth, that the power of attorney you used was invalid. What? His voice broke into a falsetto. But it's not. We have a copy. It's not expired. You have a forgery, Perry. The real document is in the custody of a notary public, with a clearly stated limit of 1 year. Again a pause, then muffled voices, obviously discussing the situation with Darlene. Dad, his voice became harsher. You're trying to intimidate us. We have legal advice. The power of attorney is valid. Then you have nothing to worry about, right? I spoke calmly, but I was seething inside. Let the bank handle it. They'll cancel the loan. I could hear the desperation in his voice. We're already committed. We put down a deposit on a house in Broken Hills. That's your problem, not mine. Dad, he took a deep breath, clearly trying to pull himself together. We can make a deal. What do you want? Greenberg nodded at me, encouraging me to continue the conversation in that direction. I want my house, Perry, completely unencumbered, and I want you and Darlene to leave me alone. But how are we going to pay the bank back? He was almost shouting. We don't have that kind of money. You had a plan in case I found out what you were up to before you could sell the house, I said, remembering one of the recorded conversations. Something about backup and business insurance. The silence on the other end was deafening. Were you eavesdropping on us? Perry finally squeezed out. I was recording you, I corrected. In my house, by the way. And yes, I have recordings of you discussing how you plan to deceive me. That's illegal. There was panic in his voice now. You can't use those tapes. Maybe not in court, I agreed. But in a bank? In the police? Among your business associates? The records of a man planning a real estate fraud using forged documents. I think a lot of people would be interested to hear it. Soren, you wouldn't dare. His voice dropped to a whisper. I'm your son. You only remind me of that when you need something. Muffled voices on the other end of the line again. Then I heard Darlene. Horace, it's Darlene. Let's be reasonable. We're all upset about Trixie. No one is thinking clearly. Maybe we made a mistake with this loan, but it's not a mistake, I interrupted. Mistakes are random. You've been planning this for months. I heard you tell your sister on the phone that you were soon to be living in a Victorian mansion. That was January, Darlene, 9 months before you took out the loan. You've been following us all this time? Her voice was a mixture of outrage and fear. No, I answered tiredly. I was just being careful. After I found the nursing home brochures in Perry's drawer with the prices marked, Greenberg raised an eyebrow, a detail he didn't know. I nodded. Yes, it really happened, about a year ago. Horace, Darlene's voice turned honeyed. We can come to an agreement. How about we sell the house and split the money? 30% for you? The rest for us? That's fair considering your age and… Darlene, I interrupted her, feeling the anger rising in me. I'm 75, not 105. I'm not going to die anytime soon, much to your disappointment, and the house is 100% mine. I built it with my own hands, and I'm not going to give you a dime. Then we'll sue, she screamed. We'll prove that the power of attorney is valid. We'll say you're out of your mind and incapable of managing your finances. Greenberg shook his head, making a hand gesture signifying empty threats. Sir, try it, I said calmly. Just keep in mind that I have tapes of you saying I'm barely thinking and about to die. I don't think the judge would like that kind of concern for an elderly relative. It was just a conversation. Her voice was shaking. People say all sorts of things in private conversations, including plans for fraud. There was silence. Then I heard Perry. What do you want, Daddy? Just tell me. I already did. My house free and clear of foreclosures, and for you to leave me alone. But how are we going to pay the bank back? He said it again. You took out a loan, you pay it back. Sell the cars, the jewelry, give up the house in Broken Hills. Get a job. That's impossible, Darlene screamed. We're going to lose everything. And I'm supposed to lose my house and end up in a nursing home while you enjoy the fruits of my labor? I felt my voice trembling. You didn't even wait for Trixie to be buried. You came to my house the day after she died to tell me you stole it from me. We didn't steal, Perry started, but I interrupted. That's enough. Here's my offer. I won't go to the police and I won't distribute the records if you settle the bank problem and leave me alone. No contact, no claims on my home or property, no attempts to declare me incompetent, nothing. You're giving up your own son? Perry sounded genuinely surprised. You gave up on me when you decided to steal my house. What about your promise to Mom? He played his last card. You promised her you'd never leave me. I felt something clench inside. Evelyn. She was always protecting Perry, always making excuses for him. Your mother died believing she had raised a good man, I said quietly. I'm glad she didn't live to see what you became. There was a long pause. Then, we'll think about your offer, Perry finally said in a dry, businesslike tone, and we'll get back to you later. Don't bother, I replied. Contact my attorney, Arthur Greenberg. Further negotiations will go through him. I disconnected without waiting for an answer. Greenberg turned off his recorder and looked at me with respect. You handled yourself well, Horace. Very well. I shook my head. I feel terrible. That's my son, Art. My only child. The one who tried to rob you of your home. He reminded me gently. You're protecting yourself, and there's no shame in that. I nodded, but the bitterness wouldn't go away. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost my son without even realizing it. What now? I asked. Now we wait. They're trapped and they know it. They have only two choices. Either find a way to pay the money back to the bank or face criminal prosecution for fraud and forgery. Greenberg began to gather the papers back into his briefcase. I think they'll choose the first option. How can they recover that kind of money? They have the means, Greenberg shrugged. Maybe not all $450,000, but a significant portion. Darlene comes from a wealthy family as far as I know. Or they could borrow against other assets. Cars, stocks if they have them. As a last resort, they could go to her parents for help. They'd never do that, I said, remembering Darlene's pride. She'd rather die than admit to her family that she'd been caught cheating. Then they'll have to look for other options. Greenberg zipped up his briefcase. In the meantime, you need to rest, Horace. You look exhausted. He was right. Fatigue came over me like a leaden blanket. All those days of tension, the sleepless nights at Trixie's bedside, the shock of betrayal, they were taking their toll. Stay here tonight, Greenberg said, heading for the door. Tomorrow we'll think of a more suitable place. Maybe you could stay with Carol and me until things settle down. I nodded gratefully. Greenberg and his wife had invited me over for dinner more than once since Evelyn's death. They were good people. Thanks, Art, for everything. He waved his hand. Don't thank me. You would have done the same for me. He opened the door but stopped on the threshold. By the way, you mentioned something about valuables hidden in the house. Is that true or a bluff? I smiled for the first time in a long time. Both. There really is a secret stash that no one knows about, behind a false panel in the basement. But the valuables. It's not gold or diamonds if that's what you mean. It's Evelyn's letters, our wedding photos, Perry's first drawings, things that are priceless to me, but useless to them. Greenberg nodded with understanding. Clever. Another psychological lever. They'll think they're missing something valuable, even if they return the house to the bank. Exactly, I confirmed, although now I wish I'd hidden something really valuable in there. Could have come in handy in my situation. You have something more valuable than money, Greenberg said seriously. Proof of their fraud, and they know it. After he left, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling. The events of the day replayed in my head like the frames of an old movie. The shock on Perry and Darlene's faces when I turned on the tape. Their panic on the phone when they realized the plans were falling apart. Their desperate attempts to find a way out of the trap they'd driven themselves into. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, there was only fatigue and sadness. This was not how I envisioned the end of my life. Not in a motel, alone, without my family, without the granddaughter I loved most in the world. But at least I still had my home. The home I'd built for future generations, even if those generations would no longer exist. With that thought, I finally fell into a restless sleep. The morning was cloudy, and so was my mood. I awoke to the sound of raindrops drumming on the eaves of the motel. I lay still for a few moments, trying to remember where I was, and then reality hit me with a heavy wave. Trixie was gone. My house is mortgaged. Perry and Darlene had betrayed me. I struggled to get up from the sold-out bed, feeling my joints aching. The room was cold. The old heater under the window was humming, but it gave out almost no heat. I strolled into the tiny bathroom, where I was greeted by a tired face in the cracked mirror. Gray hair stuck out in all directions, my eyes sunken and red, the stubble on my cheeks turning completely white. You really do look your age, old man, I thought as I opened the rusty faucet. After washing my face with ice water, I felt a little better, enough to spring into action. I checked my phone, 3 missed calls from Perry, and 1 message. Dad, we can work this out amicably. Call. I ignored both the calls and the message. Instead, I dialed Greenberg. How are you, Horace? He asked without preamble. I've been better, I answered honestly. What's the plan for today? A meeting at the bank at 10 o'clock, then perhaps a visit to the police station, depending on the results. Do you think it will come to that? Greenberg was silent for a moment, then sighed. I don't know, Horace. It all depends on the bank. If they think the power of attorney was valid, we'll have to go to the police with a fraud and forgery claim. If they agree that the document is invalid, the loan will be canceled and the problem will solve itself. What then about the money they have already received? That would be the bank's headache, not yours. But I suspect most of the funds are still in the accounts. It's been too little time. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. The First National Bank of Brockton was only a few blocks from the motel. I could have walked, but the weather was nasty, so Greenberg insisted on picking me up. At exactly 9:30, his silver sedan pulled up in front of the motel entrance. I walked down the slippery steps, holding on to the banister, and gratefully ducked into the warm interior of the car. Did you bring the tapes? Greenberg asked, pulling into the driveway. I patted my breast pocket where the tape recorder was. It's all here, and a copy of the real power of attorney, too. Greenberg nodded, staring intently at the road through the rain. Horace, he began cautiously, I have to ask again. Are you sure you want to go this way? This is your son, after all. There may be a way to resolve the situation without escalation. I looked at the buildings of Brockton flying by, the city where I've lived my whole life, where Perry was born, where Evelyn died, where I buried Trixie just 3 days ago. I'm sure, Art, they crossed the line. I gave them a chance to make things right, but they chose threats and attempts at manipulation. Greenberg nodded without taking his eyes off the road. Just wanted to make sure. It's easy to act out of anger at times like this and regret it. I don't feel anger, I said, surprised at how true that was. Only fatigue and frustration. The bank greeted us with marble floors, dimmed lights, and an air of understated luxury. The young woman behind the information desk directed us to the office of the deputy manager, Mr. Phelps. Phelps turned out to be a middle-aged man with balding hair and an impeccably pressed suit. He shook our hands, offered us coffee, we both declined, and sat at the massive desk with his fingers folded in a house. "Now, Mr. Bilby, Mr. Greenberg," he began in a businesslike tone, "I understand there's been a problem with a recent loan." Such a problem is an understatement, Greenberg replied, pulling out a file folder. "My client was a victim of fraud by his own son and daughter-in-law. They used an invalid power of attorney to mortgage his house without his knowledge or consent." Phelps frowned. "That's a serious charge, Mr. Greenberg. Do you have proof?" "Nah, we have the original power of attorney, notarized, with a clearly stated expiration date of 1 year from the date of signing." Greenberg put the document on the table. "It expired 2 years ago." Phelps scrutinized the paper, then pulled another document from his desk drawer, apparently a copy of the power of attorney Perry had provided. "Indeed, these documents are different," he said after a moment of comparison. "Our copy doesn't have the limitation clause." "That's because it's a forgery," I said. "My son used a forged document." "Do you have proof of forgery?" Phelps asked, a note of skepticism slipping into his voice. "More than enough," Greenberg replied, nodding at me. I pulled out the tape recorder and pressed the play button. Perry and Darlene's voices filled the room. When he finally goes into the hospital, we'll use power of attorney. He won't even remember signing it. What if he discovers it before we've had a chance to do the paperwork?" "He won't. He'll be too busy with that precious granddaughter of his." I stopped the tape and looked at Phelps. His eyebrows crept up and his lips pressed into a thin line. "There's more," I said, rewinding to another segment. "The power of attorney expired a long time ago." Perry's voice trailed off. "But I have a scan. I can remove that time-limited part." "And if the bank checks?" Darlene's voice. "They won't check that thoroughly. Usually they just see if there's a document." I turned off the tape. Phelps sat leaning back in his chair, his face darkening. "That's very convincing," he said at last. "Akron, I must inform you that our bank takes such cases with the utmost seriousness. If the power of attorney has indeed been forged, the loan agreement is null and void." "It was forged," Greenberg said firmly. "You can check the original at the notary's office. We'll provide all the necessary data." Phelps nodded, making notes. "Of course, we'll do a thorough check. In the meantime, I will suspend all transactions on this loan." He looked up at me. "Mr. Bilby, do you intend to file a police report?" I looked at Greenberg. He nodded slightly, leaving the decision to me. "Yes," I answered after a pause. "I want them to be held responsible." "I understand," Phelps made another note. "In that case, the bank will cooperate with law enforcement. We will also start the procedure of returning the issued funds." "What about the house?" I asked, and that was the main question I was concerned about. "If the loan agreement is recognized as invalid, the lien will be removed," Phelps answered. "Your house will remain completely in your possession, free of encumbrances." I felt the weight that had been weighing on my shoulders for the past few days eased a little. At least my house would be saved. "How long will the process take?" Greenberg asked. "It's hard to say for sure," Phelps shrugged. "With clear evidence like yours, maybe a few weeks. At worst, a couple months if it goes to trial." We discussed a few more technicalities, then shook hands and went outside. The rain had intensified into a real downpour. "What now?" I asked when we got into the car. "Now the police station," Greenberg said, starting the engine. "We have to file a formal complaint of fraud and forgery." On the way to the station, I thought again about the consequences of my actions. Filing a police report meant that Perry and Darlene could be investigated, maybe even get jail time. My son is a criminal. How did it come to this? But the other part of me, the part that still remembered the look on their faces when they broke the news of the house to me, had no doubts. They had to answer for their actions. At the police station, we were met by Detective Morrison, a stocky man with tired eyes and a lock of gray hair. He listened carefully to our story, studied the documents and records, making notes in a notebook. "It's in Mr. Bilby," he said as he finished writing. "I understand that this is your son. Are you sure you want to follow through?" That question was beginning to irritate me. "Detective, if it hadn't been my son, but some stranger trying to steal my house. Would you have asked that question? Morrison shook his head. Probably not. Then why are you asking now? The law's the same for everyone, isn't it? Theoretically, yes, the detective agreed. But in practice, family cases are always more complicated. People file applications in a fit of anger and then withdraw them when their emotions subside. I don't act out of emotion, I said firmly. I'm fully aware of what I'm doing. Morrison nodded. In that case, I will accept your statement. But I must warn you, the process may be long and unpleasant. There will be interrogations, possibly a trial. You'll have to testify against your own son. I'm ready. After filling out the necessary paperwork and handing over copies of the evidence, Greenberg and I left the station. The rain had finally stopped, but the sky was still covered with heavy clouds. Are you really prepared for the possibility of Perry going to jail? Greenberg asked as we got into the car. I don't think it's going to come to that, I answered, looking up at the gray sky. Perry always got his way. Even in this situation, he'd probably find a way to get the least punishment possible. Maybe, Greenberg agreed, especially if he paid the bank back and made amends. We drove in silence for a while. Then Greenberg asked, Where to now? Back to the motel? I shook my head. No, I want to go home. Are you sure? Perry and Darlene could be there. Let them try to stop me, I said with a determination I hadn't felt since I'd started rebuilding the house years ago. To my relief, when we pulled up to the house, there was no sign of Perry and Darlene's presence. The driveway was empty and the curtains were pulled back. Do you want me to come in with you? Greenberg asked, stopping at the porch. I thought for a moment, then shook my head. No, I'll be fine. Thanks for everything, Art. Call me if you need anything, he said, shaking my hand. And be careful. They can be unpredictable when they find out about the police. I nodded, grabbed my bag, and got out of the car. Walking up the familiar porch steps, I pulled out my keys and opened the door. The house greeted me with silence and a musty smell. I turned on the hallway light and looked around. Everything looked the same as when I left, but something subtly changed. Maybe it was just my perspective. The house that had always been my refuge now seemed like a place of betrayal and pain. I walked into the living room, placed my bag on the couch, and sat down in my chair. There were still pictures on the mantelpiece. Evelyn, Perry in her graduation gown, Trixie on the swing. I stared at them, trying to feel anything but empty inside. The phone in my pocket vibrated. A message from Perry. Dad, are you in the house? We need to talk. It's urgent. I didn't answer. Instead, I got up and started methodically going around the rooms, checking to see if anything was missing. Everything was in place except for a few knickknacks from the mantelpiece, a silver frame, an antique clock I'd gotten from my father. Small things, but their absence spoke volumes. In the study, I discovered that the safe had indeed been broken into. The door was slightly bent, and the only papers left inside were papers of no value. Old bills, instructions for appliances, warranty cards. All the important documents I had tampered with were gone, just as I suspected. I went down to the basement. It was perfectly organized shelves of tools, neatly stacked building materials, cans of paint. Perry had never been interested in this part of the house, finding it dull and dusty. He didn't even know about the hiding place behind the false paneling I'd created at the beginning of the renovation. I pulled back a section of the wood paneling, revealing a small recess in the wall. Inside was a metal box. I pulled it out, opened the lid, and was relieved to see the contents intact. A stack of Evelyn's letters tied with faded ribbon, our wedding photos, Perry's childhood drawings, a small box containing a lock of Trixie's hair she'd given me for my 8th birthday. Grandpa, this is a keepsake for you, she said then, holding out the envelope with a lock of her sparse hair. When I go completely bald, at least you'll have something left. I clutched the box in my hand, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Then I carefully put everything back in, closed the box, and put it back where it belonged. Sliding the panel shut, I went upstairs. Barely had I entered the living room when I heard the sound of the front door opening. Perry and Darlene entered the house without knocking, as if they still had the right to do so. Dad, Perry exclaimed when he saw me. Thank God you're here. We've been looking everywhere for you. He looked rattled and worried. Darlene stood behind him, pale with reddened eyes. What do you want? I asked coldly. We got a call from the bank, Perry said, rubbing his hands together nervously. They said you were disputing the loan, that you've been talking to the police. That's right. Dad, you can't do this. His voice broke into a scream. Do you realize what this means? I do. You're facing criminal prosecution for fraud and forgery. Darlene stepped forward. Horace, be reasonable. This is going to ruin our lives. Perry could go to jail. You should have thought of that before you forged documents and stole my house. We didn't steal, Perry yelled. We just wanted a better life. For all of us. For ourselves, I corrected. Don't lie now, Perry. You were going to put me in a nursing home while you enjoyed yourself with the money from the sale of my house. That's not true. Stop. I held up my hand to stop him. I've heard all your plans. I wrote them down. The police heard them too. So did the bank. Game over. They looked at each other, and I could see the panic in their eyes. What are we going to do? Darlene whispered to Perry, but he just shook his head, apparently without an answer. You can start by paying the bank back, I said. If you can do that before it goes to trial, you might be able to avoid jail time. Where are we going to get $450,000? Perry asked desperately. That's your problem, I answered. You took the money, you pay it back. Dad, please. Perry took a step toward me, but I backed away. We can work this out as a family. No police, no courts. We'll find a way to make this right. I looked at my son, the only child I'd raised, loved, built this house for, and created a future for. And I felt nothing but exhaustion. It's too late, Perry. You made your choice when you decided to steal my house while I sat by my dying granddaughter's bedside. Now live with the consequences. You're giving up your own son? There was genuine amazement in his voice, just as there had been during our phone conversation. No, Perry, I said quietly. You're the one who gave up on me when you decided that my house and my money were more important than our relationship. I headed for the door, signaling that the conversation was over. Go away. This is my home and I don't want you here. You'll regret this, Darlene hissed, grabbing Perry's arm. We'll do anything to prove you're incapacitated. We'll say you have dementia, that you don't know what you're doing. Try it, I smiled without joy. I have a medical report, dated last month, of complete sanity and capacity. My friend Greenberg took care of it when we began to suspect you were up to something. Their faces contorted with shock and disappointment. I saw their last hopes crumble. Get out of my house, I repeated, opening the front door. And don't come back. They walked out without another word. I closed the door behind them and turned the key in the lock. Then I went into the living room and sat down in my chair again, feeling strangely empty. I had won, saved my home, exposed their plans, made them accountable for their actions. So why did that victory feel like defeat? Because I lost my family, completely and irrevocably. Despite our differences, despite his flaws, Perry was my son. And now there is a gulf between us that cannot be bridged. I took Trixie's picture from the mantelpiece. Her smile, frozen in the picture, seemed as distant as the light of a faded star. What do you think, little girl? I whispered, looking into her eyes in the photo. Did I do the right thing? Of course, there was no answer, but somehow I was sure Trixie would have understood me. She had always valued honesty and fairness above all else. In the days that followed, events unfolded rapidly. The bank officially recognized the loan agreement as invalid and started the refund procedure. Most of the money was still in Perry and Darlene's accounts. They had only spent about $50,000 on a down payment for a house in Broken Hills. The police opened a criminal case for fraud and forgery. Perry and Darlene hired an attorney who immediately offered a plea bargain to the investigation. They pleaded guilty, made full restitution, and received suspended sentences plus community service. The money for the restitution came from Darlene's parents. As I suspected, she was forced to ask them for help. It must have cost her the rest of her pride. A month after the whole thing started, I received an email from Perry. Not an electronic one, but a real paper one, written in the neat handwriting he'd inherited from Evelyn. Dad, he wrote, I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. What we did is unforgivable. I can only say that I acted out of desperation, not malice. Darlene and I are getting a divorce. After everything that's happened, we can't stay together. I'm moving to Portland, got a job there. I'm starting from scratch. I don't know if you'll ever want to talk to me again, but if you do, here's my address. I reread the letter several times, then folded it neatly and put it away in my desk drawer. I didn't burn it. I didn't throw it away. I just put it away. Maybe someday I'd be ready to respond, but not now.